All right, so I did a character creation video for the last release of beta, and a few things have changed for the final release, just how stats are distributed and what impact they have. So I need to go back and refresh the character creation video. So let's start then by building the team, and this video will be focused on that, explaining the attributes, explaining the skills. I'm not going to claim that I'm going to build the most effective or efficient min-max team. I'm just going to build the type of team that I want to play, the personalities and the sorts of skills that I want to bring to bear, and then just try to make sure that they're going to be effective. So this may not be the best team, but it should still walk you through the basic considerations that you'll want to use in building your own team. I guess the first thing to notice is that you can create a new character from scratch, or you can use one of the pre-built templates, or if you've got other characters that you've created before and exported them, these are other characters that have worked well for me in the past, and so I can use them to save time here in this video. I guess the first thing to notice is that your core team, the team that you directly control and create, is a set of 4. Your team can be as large as 7, so you can fill out your team with as many as 3 NPCs as you go through the story of the game. But NPCs, they have their own stories and they have their own motivations. Some of them may leave you, they may come and they may go, and so you can't depend on them 100%, but they are there to help round out your skill set. Still, it's important to make sure that the skills that you're going to rely on, that you really can't live without, you'll want to have on your core 4. So let me just pick a team here. Here's a leader guy I can pop in who's worked well for me in the past. Here's going to be a heavy weapons guy. Here's a sniper mechanic girl and a melee girl. Alright, so let's go through each of these and just talk about how they're developed differently as a way to illustrate what the attributes and the skills are about. So let's start with the leader guy. The attributes here in the upper left, they aren't critical. I mean, you can have a lot of the things that the attributes affect, like ranged skill chance, which coordination does up here, can actually be pretty significantly compensated for by developing skills themselves. Like the difference between one skill point in assault rifles here, this is minus 5% chance to hit, and the next one up is an extra 5% chance. If you compare that with what coordination is doing, every point here just gives you an extra %. You can see that that some of the attributes, you can have low values, even if they seem to be important for your character, and still make up the difference with a lot of skill development. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But this guy, his coordination is reasonably high. In fact, it's the highest of his attributes, because he's going with ranged weapons. He's going to be my leader and more of my social character, my talker, so I don't want to invest too heavily in combat stuff for him, because he needs freedom to develop other kinds of skills. So he's just going to have one weapon that he works with. And if you're just going to have one weapon, assault rifles is a great way to go, because it's pretty versatile. It's good long range, it's reasonably good short range. There is a penalty if somebody's right up against you, but you can take a step or two back usually, and that cancels out the penalty, and you're okay to go. So assault rifles gives him a lot of freedom to develop in other areas, and that's what this guy's going to want to do. I mean, his next highest attribute is charisma, because he's going to be, his leadership skill allows him to improve the hit chance of all the other members of the team. It also helps him keep the NPCs in control, because if his leadership is low, then they can go off the leash and the AI takes them over, and that's usually not a good thing because the AI isn't very bright. And then he's also going to be developing some of these conversation skills, these 3 ass skills, let's call them: smart ass, kiss ass, hard ass. They basically just give you different conversation options when you're in dialogue. It'll give you different choices, different ways to resolve quests and things like that, which makes the game more interesting from my perspective. So he's going to be investing there that way. You'll see his intelligence is at 4 here. Almost all my characters have an intelligence of either 4 or 8, at least the ones that I make. NPCs sometimes go lower. But 4 and 8 are the levels at which intelligence give you extra skill points per level. And so if I wanted to get more than the skill point he's got here, I'd have to invest 4 more points to get up there, and that's a lot of investment to get there. So he's not going to do that. He'd have to compromise in other areas too much. But 4 is a good middling value. If you have an intelligence of 4, you can develop 3 skills pretty effectively, and then later in the game you might spread out into 4. But that's a good ballpark to shoot for. If I go as high as 8, I might develop 4 and maybe 5 skills over time. But that's a good rule of thumb. Strength, I feel okay about keeping that low. This is probably a controversial choice. Strength, affects quite a few things. It affects the amount of health you've got. It affects melee damage, but of course he doesn't care about that. It also affects how much you can carry. I just happen to be fairly comfortable with the equipment that I know he's going to want. That I think I can get by fine with a strength of 1. You know, his health isn't going to be great, but that's all right because that's, you know, it's not, combat is not really what he's about, and he's not going to be on the front lines all the time. Later on, because every 10 levels you get another attribute point, if I feel like I really need to, I'll give him an extra point of strength, but no more than that. And so I'm comfortable keeping it at that level. If you're playing for the first time, you might want to give him a little bit more strength because it does affect health, and that is something to worry about. But it's just the trade-off of giving him points in other areas were just more important to me, so I'm going that way. Awareness here is about initiative, mainly. It does affect other things, like chance to evade, but initiative is really the most important thing. And in fact, initiative may be one of the more important considerations for combat, because it works differently from other turn-based games. Other turn-based games will give you a rigid sequence where every round each character gets 1 turn. That's not how Wasteland 2 works. Wasteland 2 can actually give you more turns more frequently if you have a high initiative. So there's a bit of a balance going on here between action points and initiative. Action points is a measure of how much you can do in your turn, but initiative can give you more turns. So it's possible if you have a high initiative and low action points, you might actually have more activity over time than if you had high action points and low initiative. And depending on how many action points your weapons cost, that trade-off is going to be worth thinking about. Okay. So let's look at a couple other characters and how they're developed differently to illustrate some more about this. So here's Carl, my heavy weapons guy. He hasn't invested in any attributes as highly as the other guy did. He's got above average strength because he's going to be going with heavy machine guns. And some of those heavy weapons have a strength requirement, so he needs to make sure he's got an above average strength to be able to handle the big stuff. Since, again, these heavy machine guns have a bit of an aim penalty when things get close, it's good to have something to fall back on, and since his strength is already decent, blunt weapons will get a good damage boost from that, so that's a good place for him to fall back to if people get too close, without having to run around all the time to stay out of range of them. He's also going to develop a bit in demolitions, which turns out to be a really important supplementary skill. Demolitions allows you to disarm traps on chests and things like that. It also lets you disarm landmines, and you run into the stuff actually quite a lot out in the Wastelands. So you want to have at least one character that's leveled up a bit in demolitions. He's not here for his personality. I gave him decent speed because I want and awareness because I want his initiative and action points to be up. So this initiative is actually pretty strong. He's going to be in the first tier of people going almost each combat. He's not going to be the first, but he'll be like in the top 3 people going. And his action points are high enough that depending on his weapon, he might be able to get off 1 or 2 bursts per round. And then again, I'll get an extra attribute point every 10 levels, and I'll be able to push some of the stuff higher. I'll probably give him more action points. Alright, let's look at a couple other characters then. So here's my sniper mechanic girl, and her main attack is going to be these long-range sniper rifles. Now the way combat, or the way the turn-based combat in Wasteland 2 works is that you can start a shot before the turn-based mode has even begun, and I often use a sniper to do that. So the sniper is sort of the trigger to launch combat, and so they can get off a shot before any combat has started, and then once the combat starts, if they have a high initiative, they can also go first. And then after they go first, then the enemy still has to kind of run up close to kind of get within range. So if a sniper has high initiative, they can often get off 3, maybe even 4 shots if they can get off 2 shots per turn before anybody really has a chance to do anything. And that's terrific for a sniper. So I really invested in getting her initiative high. 14 initiative I found, at least in the early stages of the game, or the first half of the game, is high enough that she's almost always going to be going first. There will be some enemies who will have a higher initiative, and she may go second or third, but she's always kind of gonna be in the top tier and able to get off a couple shots. Sniper rifles tend to cost more action points than other weapons, so there are sniper rifles that would allow her to get off 2 shots per turn, but a lot of them are going to be higher than that. So she's most often only going to be able to get off 1 shot per turn, and so the idea is that she's just going to be taking that 1 shot as often as possible. And so that's why I really push the initiative more than the action points here. Her awareness then is about boosting the initiative. Her coordination is not maxed out, so even though she's, it's all about ranged weapons, again, the difference between a coordination of 6 and a coordination of 10 is just 4% with the range chance. And she can get an awful lot more just by investing in her sniper rifle skill. The difference again is 5% per skill point, so she'll very quickly kind of make up that difference, and the 4% difference will be a rounding error. In fact, she'll get most of that just from the leadership of the other leader guy. So I'm not worried about that. Strength again, this is something I often do, but I keep it low. She's going to be in the back. She's not going to be taking a lot of hits if I position her right, so I'm not so worried about her health. Carrying capacity is going to be a little bit of an issue, but I can work around that. I'll have mules on the team, people with high strength that I can shift things around with. The other thing to note for her is that I put her intelligence all the way up at 8, so she can develop 4 different skills. So she's the more manually dexterous character, so she's going to have sniper rifles but also be able to develop lockpicking and safe cracking, and I think will also be developing her weaponsmithing so that she can attach mods, new scopes and to her rifles, as well as break down weapons in the field and have parts to help mod other people's weapons. That actually turns out to be a quite important supplementary skill. The game gives you a lot of options there for modding weapons, and that's going to be her job and her contribution to the team. So she's actually pretty strong. And this last character is probably the weakest of the set. Melee is not the strongest character type in Wasteland 2. I just enjoy playing it, and so I keep trying to make it work. But she's probably the weakest member of the team, especially in the beginning. Her strength is fairly high because strength gives you a bonus to your melee weapon damage, so she definitely wants some of that, as well as some extra critical chance for melee weapons. Bladed weapons is going to be her thing. Bladed weapons tend to be weak against armored opponents, so she also needs something to do when they're facing armored enemies, and happily energy weapons gives her a good counter there. Energy weapons are actually more effective against armored opponents, so if there's a heavily armored opponent, she's going to switch over to energy weapons, but then for everybody else she's going to go back to her blades. I've also given her perception, which is another really important supplementary skill. Perception is what lets you spot things like landmines and traps, and so you often want to have perception on the character who's going to be out front so that they'll notice things before anybody else. She'll also spot like things buried in the ground and stuff like that. You want to have perception on at least one of the characters on your team, and since she has a high strength and will have high health, having her out front is often going to make sense. She's also got that intelligence of 4, just so she can develop 3 skills effectively, maybe 4 as time goes on. But the rest of this is fairly low. All right, and let's talk about some things I've left out here. So those are the skills I've got on my core 4. Other skills I'm going to be able to get from NPCs. If there's one big gap in my team of 4 right now, it's the medical skills. And they're actually really important. The field medic is what allows you to restore people's health in the field when it gets low. Surgeon is actually the skill that allows people to recover once they've been knocked down and are bleeding out. So these are actually both really important for surviving in the Wasteland. I just happen to know that there's a really great NPC I can get early on who has strong investment in both of these skills. So I'm going to get this from an NPC. I also happen to know that this NPC isn't going to leave me anytime soon. So I'm okay with not developing these medical skills on my core team of 4. It's a risky thing to do. It's not the kind of thing that I would advise if you didn't know this about NPCs. It's just I happen to do. But it's worth pointing that out. All right. So let's, these other skills, they're all useful. I'm not going to go through all of them. These other skills have their uses, but they tend to be more situational. If there are skills that you would probably drop, barter really doesn't have a big effect, and you can always do a little bit more grinding or farming to kind of make up more money if you need to. Animal Whisper is sort of a fun skill, but it's really highly situational. Alarm Disarming can be useful for a few doors and for a few situations where you need to disarm alarms, but it tends to be not as important as some of the others, and so I'll probably develop it on an NPC. But yeah, let's leave it there. Let's look at the last thing then about character customization, and just about everything on the screen is cosmetic. It doesn't really affect how the game plays out, with probably the exception of gender. I think if you're a different gender, that can affect some of the dialogue. But everything else here is purely cosmetic. Just background information to sort of, help you get attached to your team and get a better developed sense of who they are and what their personality is. In Exile includes some portraits for your characters, but they're a pretty limited set, and they aren't my favorites. And so I'd highly recommend looking at some of the other custom portraits that the fan community has developed. If the mouse over here tells you what you need to have in your image. So as long as it's a certain size and a certain format, if you put it in a certain file location, which you see laid out here, then the game will automatically recognize it during character creation, and you can attach that to your character. You can then tweak the character model. The options here are pretty limited, but you can at least get as close as possible to the visualization you had in mind, and then go with it. So, enough for character creation. Let's go ahead and actually jump in with this team now and start playing. The difficulty setting, Ranger is a good balance for me. It's really feels like a struggle to survive without being so hard that I have to min-max all my characters. It just gives me a little more freedom to play characters with personality, like my melee girl. And so that's the difficulty level I'm going to go with. But feel free to choose your own. And by the time we get into the next video, we'll be actually in the game, running around.